Full-time Chelsea 5, Morecambe 0, comfortably through to the fourth round of the FA Cup as expected. The game ended, especially the last period of it, in the way I think most of us would have anticipated. Chelsea completely dominant, comfortably scoring goals, some nice goals and moments for fringe players. That's kind of how these games have gone for the majority of my life, especially as Chelsea have been the dominant side facing a League One, League Two opposition at Stamford Bridge. There was a period, and I think the first half was a little bit more tricky. Not so much that I ever felt there was a real danger of Chelsea not winning the game, but I thought there was a danger that we'd walk away from this game with a lot more negativity or criticism about the performance, because I was kind of watching that game play out in the first half and Chelsea looked very slow, ponderous at times on the ball. We missed the penalty for Christopher Nkunku. There were some breakaways for Morecambe, and just players didn't seem to be at it. It didn't seem to be an occasion where players looked, fringe players that was, ready and willing and motivated to make an impression. And I don't know what that reflects. I don't know what that would mean for those players moving forward. However, undeniably, when you look at the way the game eventually played out, it went as expected. So can you really read too much into that? Morecambe arrived at Stamford Bridge and played as deep as any team is going to play at Stamford Bridge. And when you have that many bodies behind the ball, yes, Chelsea should still be beating them very convincingly, which they did. There is also a reality that it becomes a bit of a training session, attack versus defence. And, eventually, as it did, Chelsea were kind of limited or ended up just shooting from the edge of the box and getting fortune that way. So the starting lineup was not as radically different than we predicted, and I predicted. Jorgensen starting in goal instead of Josh Achimpong, Reece James starting his first game in a while, Tosin and Disasi the back two, Vega, Romeo Lavia starting a game and playing a half of football. Pedro Neto, I think, was a little bit of a surprise inclusion. Christopher Nkunku, Joao Felix, Tariq George and Mark Guiu, all players we expected to start. I think it was quite notable that Pedro Neto only got half of football and he didn't do much in that half of football, so I don't think it was a good afternoon for him personally. However, it was close to what we expected. I think the real shame was that Samuel Raksaki got food poisoning, I think it was. So he wasn't available for this game, and I think it would have been one he may well have started, and he may have started instead of Pedro Neto. So shame for him, and there was some discourse that I had on X and others did about the lack of academy players, specifically on the bench. I found it a little bit weird that I saw the likes of Cole Palmer, Enzo Fernandez and Nicholas Jackson all on the bench. Yes, they didn't come off the bench, but in this type of game, especially the way it eventually went, you kind of felt, well, wouldn't it be a nice time to give those players some more minutes? It's easy to do it against Astana in a bit of a dead rubber game when none of the first team players or senior players want to go out to Kazakhstan and play. I think today was a bit of a missed opportunity on that front, especially if you're looking to rest. However, let's get into individual performances. Nkunku, obviously, he misses that penalty. Now, there's undeniable proof that even though it was a decent save by Bagon, he clearly was off his line and there was encroachment as well. Now, you can blame VAR all you want, but I think it was just poor officiating. And I think that with that rule, I've seen it in the FA Cup before, where I think Fabregas missed a penalty years ago and there was clear encroachment, but the referee didn't seem asked about, pulling it back and making the player retake it. And, I think that is something that is just kind of a proof of how fast court times are officiating is. However, it was a lot of just Chelsea passing the ball around Morecambe's, the edge of Morecambe's box, basically. And eventually it got to a stage where Tosin and Adebayo thought, I'm going to start to venture forward. I've got the room to do it. There's not much threat of us being hit on transition. And he took a shot and it was deflected in. And then, that was very much the same later in the game when he this time scored a wonderful strike. But it was a similar type of scenario and situation where he with his right foot calls in a wonderful effort, and that's what the game kind of was. When you look at Nkunku's goal, that was some nice build up down the left side, but then a ricochet and a loose ball that drops at the feet of Christopher Nkunku for him to score his goal early into the second half. the other goals, for Joao Felix, the two Joao Felix goals were either just inside the box or at the edge of the box, and that's kind of a proof of how deep Morecambe was sitting, and it was very much shooting practice and trying to score some incredible goals for Chelsea today. And I think for Tosin, it was a nice moment. Tosin hasn't had many nice moments at Chelsea so far. I don't think we signed him to score worldies, but nice if he can add them to his repertoire. It's easy enough against Morecambe, but I think for him, obviously, it would be a positive day and one of the goals that will be replayed at the end of the season, I'm sure. And for Joao Felix too, he is someone that's very much enjoyed these B team games. Now, he did have some decent moments in the first half. It wasn't like I didn't feel like it. There were a few players I looked at throughout the course of the game and thought, especially when you have to factor in the whole of the game rather than just 45 minutes. Like Joao Felix, I'm not entirely surprised he eventually scored in this game. He's very much enjoyed the Conference League, the Carabao Cup, and this one as well. I think it kind of symbolises who Joao Felix is as a player, that he looks very good against this type of opposition. That's not the Joao Felix problem. The problem is he ever going to be more than an exhibition player? And it's fine, when you're rotating the squad and he can have the quality to do that against this type of opposition and, put in some really good goals that, will be replayed a lot of times. But I think, for him to go up to the next level, I think is still the huge question and will remain the big question, because when I look at games like this, it may seem unfair, but surely a lot of these players want to see themselves in the first team for Enzo Maresca. And unfortunately, I think that is something where I look at a Joao Felix and I wonder, will that actually happen at Chelsea for him, at least in the current moment? I do want to give some praise to Tyreek George, who got a couple assists, but still waiting for that first goal. I actually liked his performance because it was probably a good lesson for him against a very deep defence as a wide player, and having to receive the ball, go 1v1, having to at times cut back and look for passing options. And it's difficult, right, if you're up against one or two, three defenders, and when that this is one of your rare opportunities to start a game at Stamford Bridge, there maybe is a selfishness that creeps in, or a desperation, which I think at times I've seen from Tyreek George, that he really wants to score a goal, and it's great to see. I think he's a dynamic and raw and energetic wide player. However, there needs to be some precision there as well to show there is a composure to his game, and I felt we saw that a bit more today. He was showing he was a bit more of a team player, wasn't always looking to score that goal, because at times there were too many bodies in front of him. So I thought this was a positive afternoon for him as well. And listen, I think it was good to see both Reece James and Romeo Lavia on the pitch as well. Mark Guiu, not so much. And Jorgensen, I also felt it was a pretty bad day for him. I know we didn't concede. However, he had some really shaky moments, particularly with balls going into the box. And I don't think he did himself any favours, even coming close to threatening Robert Sanchez's first place. I did find it quite notable that the introduction of Marc Cucurella, the three players that came on all at half-time were Malo Gusto, Marc Cucurella and Jadon Sancho. Cucurella, for me, it was quite notable that his introduction kind of increased the level of intensity and competitiveness and urgency around this Chelsea team. And I think it's kind of reflective of things I've spoken about before with Cucurella, how he's kind of a bit of an unsung hero, or someone that does a lot of things in the game that I think makes Chelsea a more effective and competitive team. And I just thought that was a notable tweak and kind of a trend of the game, that I think it kind of shows you what those maybe B team players are lacking, because I think it's undeniable that at halftime a lot of people were reflecting on the game that it wasn't a great performance, and it definitely was a half of football. We scored at least one goal, but given the opposition, it was not good enough. But obviously we saw the goals rack in eventually in the second half. Obviously this is draw dependent. I hope we have a similar draw in the fourth round and Chelsea can progress even further in this competition. I would have liked to have seen some more young players here, but obviously we move now to Tuesday's game. Huge for Enzo Maresca. I really do think it's huge for Chelsea's season, because I think they need to get back on track. The big question will be, Achimpong didn't play in this game. Does that mean now he's a Premier League player? We will see when that team news comes out against Bournemouth. Did any of these players in your mind do enough, or kind of make an impression on you to think maybe they should be used a bit more? Because another point I do want to make before I wrap up here is that I did kind of watch that first half and certain performances, and I do kind of ponder, when you've been a coach over a festive period, when the team started to play poorly and you haven't been looking at your subs bench, I do wonder what demoralising effect that has on certain players. and for them to kind of think, well, does it really matter how I perform here because you aren't going to look at me from the subs bench? Am I going overboard there? I do think it is an interesting thing about Maresca's strategy in recent weeks that I don't think has helped Chelsea, is that B to A pipeline, or kind of the belief that you can actually progress if you're a fringe player, I think is really important in having a good harmonious squad, and maybe that impacted some players' performances. But let me know your thoughts. Who do you want in the next round? Follow me across the socials at SonOfChelsea, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.